Flock Safety is the leading safety technology platform, helping communities thrive by taking a proactive approach to crime prevention and security. Our end-to-end hardware and software suite unites cities, law enforcement, businesses, schools, and neighborhoods in a nationwide public-private safety network. For more information, visit flocksafety.com. Hey, welcome back to Policing Matters on policeone.com. I'm your host, Jim Dudley, and be sure and check us out, our video version of the interview on YouTube. Well, today on Policing Matters, we're talking with someone who isn't in uniform, but who may be one of law enforcement's strongest allies. And I've already taken to calling her Saint Abby because Abby Ellsworth is the creator and host of the podcast on being a police officer. And since launching it in 2020, she traveled coast to coast, interviewing officers and giving them space to share their stories the public doesn't usually hear. Abby, welcome to Policing Matters.
Jim, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
Oh my gosh, so great. You're not in law enforcement, and yet you've dedicated hundreds of hours of amplifying officers' voices. How do you think being a civilian has helped you connect with officers and the public?
Well, I think that's important. I do want to say I travel virtually around the country like you. And I will say also that hundreds of hours, yes, but over 15 years, what might not be clear to someone tuning in, I launched the podcast in 2020, but I started interviewing law enforcement in 2010. So, and that was, I was in the greater Seattle area, and I was doing work with agencies in that area, Seattle PD, King County Sheriff, and others. And so when 2020 happened, what it was for me was, it was a shock to me because here I saw people that I had come to know and respect, and I had this 10-year understanding of the profession, and I was seeing it under attack in ways that were not comprehensible, not just verbal, but physical, psychological, emotional, mental. I mean, these people that I knew were being abused on every possible level. And so I had this experience and I thought, I've got to do something. I mean, I can't let this happen to people I know and care about and to a profession I care about. And so and it was COVID, so I couldn't leave my house. So I thought, okay, and I'll do a podcast and then I could take it beyond my community, and I think your question about being a civilian, I think why that helped was because these poor officers couldn't get word out about the job. They couldn't talk to any civilian because they were just under attack. And I think to have a civilian asking him the questions and waiting for the answer, and giving them a safe place to talk. I mean, everyone was traumatized by what was going on. And I think also for fellow civilians, some of them were as confused as I and wanted to ask the questions and hear the answers, so I think it was like, oh my God, there's a bright light in the darkness. It's a civilian who cares, so I think that's why it helped.
Yeah, and I mean, a little context to the time, 2020, you mentioned COVID, the lockdown, right? Police were in that sort of evil role of the government telling us to get off the beaches and out of the churches, and you couldn't visit sick people in a hospital bed, and all, on and on and on. And then we had George Floyd and the further vilification, and maybe not the entire truth put out there, but it was a tough time to be a cop in America. And yet you said, I want to do something. And there's an answer in these. Why'd you start the podcast? What was the goal? Was it just to tell the stories, or was it the question in your mind as well?
Well, again, the reason I started it was situational. The reason I've continued it is different, but I think, at the time, as I said, I needed you. I kept hearing about the silent majority, and it's like, okay, somebody say something, somebody step up. And so I stepped up. I'm like, okay, here I am. And I think why I'm doing it now, things have evolved, right? We're not in that crisis place anymore. Well, for now, but now it's kind of like what I see is, I guess the goal, as I say in my open, I'm a civilian interviewing law enforcement from around the country. My goal is to tell the real stories of law enforcement, the ones that don't make the news.
Mm-hmm.
And I do it because what I see is a noble profession that few people understand or seek to understand. And it is my goal to change that and bring my fellow civilians along with me. So that's how I open every episode. That's the goal. And I also find that officers, feel a level of catharsis sometimes when they're talking to me. Some of them are retired.
Mm-hmm.
And, you may be able to relate to this, but they find emotions and things bubbling up that they pushed down for so long. And I've had many officers say, this was a very cathartic conversation. And again, I think it's because I'm a civilian. They can talk with each other about it and share, but I'm a new audience, and I think they feel better talking about it. And I also think one of my other goals is to try to help them remember the wins.
Mm-hmm.
It's, I've said this before, but it's like, if I could be so bold as to help you remember the wins, I know that there is someone you arrested whose life you changed for the better, because I've heard people say that officer changed my life because he or she arrested me. That officer may never know that. That officer may be you listening right now. I know that you've saved somebody's life going lights and sirens. I know you saved a life doing a traffic stop. So part of the goal too is that kind of morale boost, I guess you would say.
Yeah, that is so observant of you because, if I do a presentation or a training, I'll take some treats with me and ask who here has saved a life. And of course, 30, 50 cops, maybe one or two will raise their hand, but just what you said. I mean, if you've stopped somebody because their kid's jumping around out of their car seat in the back, or if you've stopped and interrupted a domestic violence dispute, or so many things that cops do and we sort of take for granted every day that may really impact their lives and may have just been enough to save their life, or at least save them from injury or from being a victim. Your podcast often highlights the human side of policing, just like you said, family, service, struggles, resilience. I love that you're bringing them back to the wins, as you said. What do you see as the biggest gap between how police work is portrayed in the media, maybe on the news even, and how you change that from your conversations?
Well, when it comes to the media, I see nothing but a gap. I see a void. I see I've covered this, as have you on your podcast. I think there is no accurate media conversation or coverage. And I think it preceded 2020, but I think a lot of it came out of 2020 when there was this national negative narrative on policing that was it became their agenda. And it was abusive, really, but it's continued. And I think that it's dangerous. And you did an episode, was it the LA captain who talked about, who wrote the book and talked about incidents and how they were covered by the media?
Greg Myers, yeah.
Yeah. So I did an episode that's similar. It was called Media Bias, and let me just find my actual headline. Okay, here it is. So it was called, so it's called Media Bias and Perpetuation of Myths, a breakdown of a New York Times article on traffic stops. And what happened was I read this article in 2021. So just, a year after 2020, it was on the front page, New York Times, above the fold, Sunday.
Mhm.
Okay.
Significant.
To put it in perspective.
Yeah.
And the headline was How Broken Taillights End in Killings by Police.
Hmm.
The subhead was At traffic stops, officers' presumption of danger breeds overreaction and seemingly avoidable deaths. I was so angry about this article that I enlisted one of my cops, a 29-year veteran, the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Department or office, and we broke it down. But it's basically saying if you are stopped by an officer in a traffic stop, you're likely to be killed.
Hmm.
And they don't, seemingly avoidable deaths. How do you define what's an avoidable death? I mean, please help me understand. Right? So, and what's dangerous about this article is they have a premise that they try to prove, and so everything they say proves the premise. It's a circular conversation, and they present things as fact when in fact they are opinion.
Hmm.
And then I think what is dangerous too is that this is the New York Times, and people are going to, I mean, theoretically, a respected media outlet, and people are going to believe what they read. And there's no context. They don't talk about on a traffic stop, the subject has a say in how it goes. If you
Hmm.
comply, if you don't try to flee, you're going to be okay. So it's an example of how, and I would say this happens more often than not. And it's concepts like this, or it's, broad subjects, but it's also specific incidents that make the news. And I feel they are never accurately covered by media. Media want to make them into something they're not, and there's no perspective. And when the media get it wrong, they never correct it. It's not like they come back and say, oops, he did have a gun.
Yeah. Yeah. Or he didn't have his hands up and say, don't shoot.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, Greg Meyer did a great job with that book about dispelling some of those biggest myths that some of you just, similar to what you just described. I subscribe to the New York Times. It's internationally read, right?
Yeah.
And they recently had an article about a terrorist who murdered a police officer, and they lavish and laud her. And the title of her story was a revolutionary who fled to Cuba passed, or something like that, when in actuality she was a murderer. And the author, just as you said, all opinion, changed the facts around, went with her claim that she had her hands up when the shooting was supposed to have happened, and all these other things. But yeah, it's cherry picking, their quote facts and making a story about it. And yeah, it's awful. And like you said, some of these myths, they never get dispelled because they've got the power of the pen, and the rest of us don't. So
Right.
if the coroner says, you know what, toxicology said this person's heart exploded, or they had X amount of drugs in their system, or they died from some other pre-existing condition, that's not thrown up there as, hey, you know what, we might have got this a little bit wrong, and here's this instead. We hardly see
Right.
it.
Right.
Hey, when you shape an episode, I know how I do it. How do you decide what details matter most? The things that civilians need to hear the most, and the things that officers really want to say?
Well, with every episode, with every interview, with every officer, I want to know that person's story because it does help humanize the badge. And I also want people to hear why these people were drawn to the profession. You know, why law enforcement? You know, and almost to a person, not everyone, but almost to a person, they say it was a calling, and they just want to help people who are in need of our help. And I want my listeners to hear that. I want to talk about the incidents they remember, the people they remember, what were the rewards. And so I typically in every episode will ask those questions. Like, give me your story, right? And then, and a lot of it is very emotional. And whether it's the trauma, like tell them, what are your critical incidents? You know, but I also I try to find examples where it demonstrates the danger of law enforcement.
Mm.
You know, split second decisions, life and death, split second decisions, running toward gunfire where everyone else runs away, clearing a building when you don't know who's inside. But I also get specific. For example, I did an interview with Daniel Carr of Police Law News, and I specifically wanted to talk about his incident where he was pretty new, and he and another officer went to someone's home to contact this guy, and the guy comes to the door with a gun. And Daniel said, training kicks in, and it's like, drop the gun, but he's ready to use deadly force.
Yeah.
And he said, for some reason, the guy dropped the gun. And it turned out to be a fake gun.
Oof.
Oof is right. Okay. So when you think about incidents like, now I'm going to forget his name. Well, so the incident in Cleveland with the kid with the gun in the park, right? When officers responded to that, the call came out as a man in the park wielding a gun. Mm-hmm. And so I think it was important to hear it looked like a real gun.
Yeah.
And then other things I try to do is, for example, I have heard people say, and I have read people say that homicide, for example, homicide detectives don't really care about solving the case. They don't care if it goes cold. And I thought that can't be further from the truth. So I found a homicide detective, NYPD, cold case detective, and I said, please tell my audience what you put into trying to solve a case. And, you know, he said it would haunt his waking hours and his dreams. It consumed his life trying to solve these cases. And so I try to find stories like that help the listener understand, look at what these people commit, mm-hmm. you know? So that's included in how I shape the interview.
Yeah. So many people say they, quote, support the police, but that kind of sounds like a slogan sometimes, like, thanks for your service. I mean, I find myself saying it, but I mean it. And how do you really show that you mean it? So from your perspective, what does real support look like?
Well, I will tell you that as a civilian, it really is hard to figure out how to show support. I mean, I had to start a podcast. I used to think, okay, what if I made a poster that said thank you? And I just went and stood in front of the precinct at, change of shift. It's like, here, thank you. Yeah, there are things you can do. I thought about this a lot because I've moved into an area that's new to me. And even in preparing to interview officers for the podcast, I'll go to the department website. And I think what people can do is go to your local department website and see if there's anything on there. Like Seattle PD used to have thank an officer. And people would write in thank yous, whether it was just broad thank yous or thank yous specific to an incident. So
nice.
Literally figure out if there's a way to get that kind of a message to your police department. Go on a ride along. I mean, it's a show of support. You can establish a relationship with an officer, or go to a precinct and see if they have events. I've read on some of the, and I used to produce officer awards banquets, all those banquets that officers hate to go to. But I want you to know this. I invited civilians who had written thank yous to the Seattle Police Department. I read every single one. I invited the person who wrote that to come to the banquet, and to a person, all of them said yes. They wanted to
Nice.
be there to show their support because there was no other way. And so there are other things you can do. Just write thank you notes at Christmas time or Thanksgiving. Send a thank you to your precinct. Have your football team send a thank you. And the other thing is, if you are uncomfortable with maybe that sort of personal contact, there are organizations you can donate to. So from a national level, Cop Line, for example, which is a 24/7 support line for law enforcement. I am at the regional level. I did it in Washington State. There's something called Code 4 Northwest that provides peer support, counseling, inpatient treatment for all first responders. There are police foundations around the country. Seattle has one, Cleveland has one, New York has one. Donate to them because they will help raise funds for training and equipment that the city can't pay for. And then, even look locally. I just did an interview with a Dallas police officer who is on the board of the Assist the Officer Foundation in Dallas for the support of Dallas police officers.
Mm.
And then I'll close with vote for the right people. Vote for mayors, vote for city council, county council, DAs that will support your police department, that will bring charges, put people in jail for committing crimes, because police aren't out there operating by themselves. They're out there trying to keep us safe. And then, living in the Bay Area or the San Francisco area, these people are right back out on the street. So make good decisions when you vote.
Yeah, all good points. Sir Robert Peel, 1829, says the police are the public and the public are the police. I mean, I'm speaking to the choir right here with all the things that you just said. I think it feels a little bit like there's a tide turning in San Francisco. We got rid of our own leftist progressive district attorney across the bay in Oakland. They got rid of their progressive 2 years into their 4-year term. So I think at some point the public does say, hey, enough is enough. I mean, how many bites of the apple do offenders get? And, I really appreciate what you said about just acknowledging the work of the police. And, when you said football teams, I was trying to think, wow, your football teams, but, our own Golden State Warriors, I have never once seen them go to a police station, and yet they will
Yes,
go to San Quentin.
absolutely.
They'll go to San Quentin and play basketball with convicted, lifers sometimes. And yeah, I get what they're saying on that side too. But I mean, I think anybody in law enforcement will tell you it takes an awful lot to convict someone to send them to a multiple year term, because the system is stacked in favor of the defense, right? I mean, there's exculpatory evidence and getting witnesses together in a cooperative community, and that doesn't always happen. But I love what you're saying. I want to add my own too. The PAL, so start young with Police Athletic League, support them. And also, I sit on the board for our San Mateo County 100 Club, and the 100 Club supports active law enforcement officers with mental health support and physical fitness support, but also we support the families of law enforcement officers killed in the line of duty. I think those are two great ones. Hey, in today's climate, public supporting police can draw criticism. I mean, you and I talked a little offline about doxing and, going after people. And how do you handle the pushback? What keeps you committed to telling these stories? I'm sure you get emails.
Actually, I don't. Well, what we said offline, in the beginning, I wasn't afraid of criticism. I was afraid of getting killed. And that sounds hysterical and overstated, but not where I was in the Seattle area at that time. People were getting doxxed, people were getting swatted. And I had a friend with a thin blue line sticker get run off the road. So in the beginning, it was actually scary. And it was scary for law enforcement too, because I had guests who would come on who would not use their real names or would not use their names or say their agency names. I had a deputy who had a take-home car who couldn't go to his son's football game. So we've moved on from that. When you're talking about criticism, I generally don't get it for the podcast. What criticism gets under my skin is criticism of law enforcement. If I hear one more time, why didn't they just shoot him in the leg? Why didn't they just shoot the knife out of his hand? Why didn't they just tase him? And I'm like, have you listened to my podcast? Yeah. It's that kind of thing. Why did they have to shoot him in the back? Why? It's just like you're not asking the question and waiting for the answer. You're asking questions that are actually criticisms, And so that's what gets under my skin.
Mhm.
And that really just motivates me to keep going.
Yeah. I want to follow up to that, but first I want to take a moment and thank our sponsor. Flock Safety works with more than 5,000 law enforcement agencies nationwide, delivering real-time intelligence through a holistic ecosystem of technology designed to keep officers safe, reduce crime, and build stronger communities. And if you're looking for real stories from the front lines, how your peers are using these tools to shape the future of safety in their cities, tune in to Flock's Real-Time Policing podcast with new episodes dropping on Wednesdays. Watch episodes on YouTube or tune in wherever you get your podcasts. For more information on Flock Safety, visit flocksafety.com. And we're back, and I'm speaking with Abby Ellsworth, creator and host of On Being a Police Officer podcast. And Abby, we just talked about criticism, and I'm sure if you're on social media, you'll hear the criticism. Has criticism ever made you rethink your approach, or has it changed the way you approach officers in telling their stories, or does it just reaffirm what you're doing?
Yeah, it reaffirms what I'm doing. I think there are podcasters who put themselves out there in a little more dangerous way. Like if you are live streaming, I think you get a little more subjected to the negativity. But I haven't expect now that I've said that, I'll probably get a bunch of emails. But I'm on social media. I think my podcast is so like yours. I'm just looking for the truth. I'm not hot-headed about anything. I don't cover politics. I don't look to offend anybody. And when I break down an incident, let's say that's, a little controversial, I do it in a very balanced way. And it's not me doing it. I do it with law enforcement. I'm not the subject matter expert, but I'm really good at asking questions.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I think I'm talking with a proponent, right? Somebody who's positive about the police messaging. I believe in that, 20-60-20 formula that says we're going to have 20% of people like are really in favor of cops, 60% who could go either way depending on what they're seeing or reading, and then that 20% you'll never change their attitude about policing.
Right.
We've had real controversies in policing, and I mean, I see them, and with 30 years of experience in law enforcement, I can sort of read between the lines sometimes. And sometimes there is that sort of wince factor when you read a story or you see a clip. Sometimes without context, we'll see a clip, and for me, I always want to say, like, well, what else happened, right? How do you balance acknowledging the realities of what's really happening while keeping the focus on the humanity and the service of the police officers you're talking to?
I feel my responsibility is to help people understand what's really happening. I think there are a lot of quote unquote controversies that really aren't. And, you know, your captain talked about some of the famous ones, but I think in just about everyday coverage, we talked about the media bias, but what is presented as a controversy really isn't. So I like you, I acknowledge that over the past 30 years, there are things, you can call them controversies, you can call them scandals. The Rampart scandal in LA. You talked about stop and frisk, which actually was technically stop, question, and potentially frisk. So there's another one where the media renamed it. But I'm not going to sit here and talk about what law enforcement gets wrong. Everybody else can do that. What I want to do is help people see that when they see a story in the news and there's an incident presented as controversial, I can help you I can look at that and see why those officers handled it the way they did.
Mm.
And I want to help people understand why he got shot in the back, why there were 96 shots. So I did an episode. This is an example of what I'm talking about. There was an incident out of Chicago. Dexter Reed, contacted by a Chicago TAC team, and the headlines were 96 shots. Police kill 26-year-old Dexter Reed. And so it's not until the fourth paragraph, again, going back to the media stuff, that it says he fired on them first. And so this is presented as a controversy. 96 shots. Well, he was in a car, in a van with tinted windows. He fired at them first. They can't see him. You've got about 5 officers. So people don't need to understand that the officer isn't going to stand there and look at his partner and say, okay, you going to shoot or am I going to shoot? Let's shoot a couple times and see if we get him.
Right.
Right? They have to unload their weapons. And so, number one, that's going to be a lot of bullets. Number two, they can't see him. So they can't tell if he's been neutralized. And then he falls out of the car, and the media says they approach his motionless body. Well, you don't know that. You don't know if he's motionless because the officer's saying, show me your hands, show me your hands. They don't. So it's, and in the end, officers were shot 11 times. He was shot 13. So 96 shots. That's all people are going to remember. Mm-hmm. So that's an example of a controversy that isn't really a controversy. It's mischaracterized, misplaced bias. Does that make sense in terms of controversy?
Not at all.
No, but I mean, am I answering your question?
No, I mean, yeah, believe me, when I ask people onto the show, it's usually about something they've done or some enforcement project or something with the community. It's usually a positive story. I'll get some authors on that will talk about a controversy, and you'll hear police officers tell their story to say just what you said. I mean, here in San Francisco, headline says police officers shoot guy in the 32 times in the trunk of a car. Mm-hmm. And that sounds like, holy smokes. And believe me, a lot of my students are reading the headline and moving on with their next thumb story. And so they don't realize that this person's robbing people in the street. He runs and jumps in his getaway car, and he jumps into the trunk. The police try to stop the car. He opens the trunk and fires from the trunk. Mm-hmm. Like you say, what are they supposed to do? So yeah, in some of these quote controversies, there is another side of the story. So I think it needs to be told. I think for me, I'd love to talk more about contemporary issues, but it's really hard to get an active law enforcement officer, especially a chief, to come on and talk about something that, they're in fear of litigation, of being
Mhm.
sued, of the family, of the press, and heaven forbid they get something wrong. And so a lot of times we're talking, well past the event. We're talking with, Peter Moskos. I think you mentioned him, who wrote a book about the out of control homicide rate in the 90s that police used, what essentially were
Broken window.
Terry stops
Right.
that were compliant with the
Exactly.
law,
Right.
and how it greatly reduced, from 3,000 homicides to 500 or so. And we never hear that story, or we hear it way too late. I
Mm.
mean, we've already gone past the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, sworn people, newscasters with their hands up, T-shirts saying "hands up, don't shoot," and we find out later that never happened.
Exactly. Let's put names of officers lost in the line of duty on football helmets.
Yeah, on the back of the helmets. Yeah.
All you ever see is, you know what?
Or Daniel Faulkner. Do you know who Daniel Faulkner is? He
No.
was the Philadelphia officer killed by
Mm,
Mumia Abu Jamal. But just about any college can tell you who Jamal was,
mm,
but they can't tell you who
mm-hmm,
Daniel Faulkner was. And yeah, I think you're right. That, I mean, I try to make a policy of not naming them, but in
mm-hmm.
in this context, I think it's important to say, oftentimes because of the media, we know way more about the
Right.
perpetrator, like this quote revolutionary who was actually a police officer murderer.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think you are doing God's work in telling these stories and bringing them to light. I don't know what kind of exposure you're getting, but I hope that, if we can promote you at all by having you here and telling this story, that, more people will tune in to on being a police officer and hearing what you have to say and what your people are saying.
Well, and I want to share with you one thought, which is a note that I got. Actually, it was an Apple review. This is to give you hope if you're in law enforcement. But this officer, became an officer, wrote that this podcast solidified his desire to be an officer. He came to the podcast to find a reason that would make him not want to do the job. And I'm guessing because I'm a civilian, he expected to hear what you and I have been talking about, that anti-cop narrative that most civilians have. He said, I wanted to hear the worst of the worst about the job, to know I truly wanted this, if I truly wanted this or not. This podcast is why I'm applying now. I highly recommend it for people on the fence to listen. And then he goes on to say that his girlfriend was an all cops are bad cops kind of person when they met. She has now completely changed her opinion and supports him 100%. This podcast helped me find a way to express the necessity of the job and the media's assault on society by making police the enemy. And so it sounds like I'm complimenting myself, but really what I'm trying to say is, if I can reach someone like that and influence his thinking enough, because God knows we need you. I'd like to see a time where law enforcement, the applications are increasing, the staffing is there, and then his girlfriend, you just said a little bit ago, there are 20% you're just never going to reach, right?
Mm-hmm,
But
mm-hmm.
there are some people you can reach. And if I can be part of that, then I've done my job,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah. Your unpaid job that you're
Yeah.
devoting a lot of time and energy to. Hey, looking ahead 5 years, I want to wrap up, and thank you so much for taking time to sit and talk with us today. What role do you hope to have on being a police officer and civilian voices like yours? How are they going to help shape the national conversation about policing?
Well, 5 years, ugh. Sounds like a long time from now. I think if you look at the past 5 years, how far we've come, I hope that the conversations we're having in less than 5 years, let's not forget that we're responsible,
Mm-hmm.
the public. for defund, abolish, for crazy police reform bills that just hide the hands of law enforcement. You know, I want everyone to, I want to be so far from that in 5 years that we're talking about, look at how well you're getting departments appropriately funded. You've got mayors who support their chiefs so their chiefs can support their rank and file. You know, I just hope that, and as I just said in this example of this officer, I hope that minds are changed, you know, that people, civilians will start looking at things objectively, and that we'll be in a far better place for law enforcement, like in the next 5 weeks, not the next 5 years.
Nice. Well, I mean, we've seen it. You just described, some of the prescriptions for, the worst possible recipe of a social experiment that said, let's get the police out of the drug war and give it to public health. And we've seen the astronomical climb in death related to overdoses. And so, okay, cops are back in the drug war. And now we've seen some other social experiments that involve defunding that you just mentioned. And we've seen crime climb out of control. I think, as you described earlier, the emphasis on policing some of these issues again has really, turned the corner on some crime. What else do we need to do to push that message? I think, statistics are doing the job for some of us, but we're going to have those deniers that are really going to be hard to convince.
Convince that crime is down, or convince
that we need police, that if you're calling for civilians to do, mental health intervention, some guy running around the street naked or carrying a machete or what have you, that, people are going to get killed before we say, okay, wait, let's rethink this again.
Yeah. I mean, there was a lot of, especially in Seattle, putting civilians in the role of responding to those calls. And I thought, well, you're going to have a lot of dead civilians because, I think there's a whole level of police being expected to change society. They can't change society. They can respond to crime, and they can't be responsible for reverse engineering someone's entire upbringing to explain why they've committed this crime. I mean, and as we've talked about before and during this episode, law enforcement is, if you can't, they're trying to get criminals off the street. And we talked about, or I've heard you talk about decriminalizing drugs. I mean, just one of the craziest things ever. And if it's a revolving door, they're dealing with the same, let's remember that police are one piece of this government society, the government in society. As I said, you've got to have a DA who will prosecute, who will charge and prosecute and put people in jail, and I actually have heard people say getting arrested was the best thing that happened to me. I mean, people seem to forget that you need to get dangerous people off the street, and sometimes it helps that person. I know, I've had cops say to me, I had someone police officer, someone came up to me and said, I don't know if you remember me. And he says, no, I'm sorry, I don't. And she said, well, you arrested me. And he said, oh, I'm sorry, and she said, no, you changed my life for the better. I'm clean. I've got my kids back. I have a job, so let's remember that police are, and there are cities, there are neighborhoods with high crime who want the police there. We are made to think that they do not. We don't want you here. Well, I don't think that's true. I think those are the neighborhoods that want them the most.
Here, here.
You know, and I want to make a pitch for the position of school resource officer, because a lot of you want to get them when they're young, and you want to help them understand what law enforcement is. That role has been cut in many departments. It's been criticized for all the wrong reasons. Like, you don't want cops showing up at school wearing a uniform because it's going to traumatize somebody. It's going to trigger them. And it's like, well, give me a break. I mean, you know, these, and so often these school resource officers are there. It's not that it's just to try to stop a school shooting, which would be noble, but, you know, it's there to talk for kids to have someone to talk to. It's there for kids who maybe something's going on at home. There's for kids who are getting bullied, and or it's just relationship building. And, you know, wear your uniform, because you should, this is a way, if it's scary to them, then here's a way to make it less scary. Here's why I'm wearing this. Here's what's on my duty belt. You know, I think that is one way to, it's really hard for law enforcement to communicate directly with the public. But get them when they're young, you know, influence them. It's like the DARE officers back in our day, if you remember the drug.
Yeah,
do you remember?
For sure. Yeah, for sure. I taught drug ed.
Oh.
Abby, thank you so much for joining us today, for the work that you're doing, for giving the voice to law enforcement officers on being a police officer. Your podcast, it continues to give law enforcement professionals a voice and helps bridge the gap between those who wear the star or the badge and those they serve. I appreciate you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Great to have you. And to our listeners, check out Abby on her own podcast called On Being a Police Officer, where you will hear stories from police officers, and you'll hear it from inside and their own truth about what's happening and how they could be better supported by the public and the communities. All right. Well, I hope everybody's good and well, and I appreciate you listening in, and check us out on YouTube if you're only listening, and vice versa. Get a run in or a workout while you're listening to the podcast. And we've got some great episodes for you. All right. Take good care, and I hope to talk to you again real soon.